seed of Abraham will have this land. Seems simple enough. Here's the problem. Abraham has no seed. Isaac's not born yet. Isaac's not born for a long time. So here's the thing. God, how is my seed going to have this land when I have no seed to inherit it? It doesn't seem possible. And we begin to doubt that God can do it. You ever been there? Abraham is looking at step one. God has told him the last step. This is what I have planned for you. I promise this will happen. Abraham can't get over the last step because he's stuck at step one. Lord, how is my seed going to inherit this land when I have no seed to inherit it? I don't have a son. I'm over 75 years old. How am I to gain a son? Folks, we've all been there, looking around and saying, how is God going to do this in my life? How is this possible? But you know what? Abraham held on to the promise of God. God told him his seed was going to have that land. And he held on to it no matter what was going on. He didn't know how it was going to happen. He didn't know when it was going to happen. He didn't know where it was going to happen. But because he had that altar that showed him God made him that promise, he knew it was going to happen. He didn't know how, he didn't know where, he didn't know when, but all he knew is it was going to happen. Tonight, that's the attitude we got to have. We're trying to figure it out before we'll believe in it. We want to see steps 1 through 6 before we buy into it. Folks, we don't have to be that way. God has all power in heaven and earth. And if He said something, He can do it tonight. If He's told you you can have happiness, you can have happiness. If He's told you you can have peace, you can have it tonight. Well, Brother Blake, I don't see how God's going to resolve this issue. I don't see how He's going to make these things right. Listen to me. God is not limited like you are. God has all power. And if we just believe, we can have what God has promised us. So there's a doubt, a possibility. We don't know if things are possible. But God can do impossible things. You think about the disciples when Jesus told them, He said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into heaven. And they said, oh Lord, how should anybody get into heaven? And Jesus said, what is impossible for men is possible for God. Listen to me tonight. What you may think is impossible in your life that God cannot fulfill, He can. But you must believe. You must believe. Here's the second thing. We got the doubt of possibility. We don't think God, it's impossible that God can do this in our life. Well, we'll move on from that. Here's the second thing. We have this doubt that we've messed up, that God's not going to fulfill His promise anymore. You ever been there? I've messed up. I've done something wrong in my Christian walk, and God's going to hold that against me. And now He's got reason. I've done wrong against God, and He's no longer going to give those promises to me like He said He would. I don't know about you, but I've been there. I've messed up. God's not going to give me what He told me He was going to give me because I've been bad, because I've sinned, because I've messed up. Abraham did that. What are you talking about? Oh, don't you remember? Abraham got impatient. Isaac was promised to him. A son was promised to him. 10 years later, no son. Gets impatient. Starts to doubt God. And he says, look, I'll just help God alone. And I'll have a son with Hagar instead of Sarah. And that will be my son. Guess what? That's not the son God was talking about. God had different plans. But Abraham grew impatient. And could you imagine the thoughts that ran through Abraham's mind, knowing that he had taken matters into his own hands and he had messed up, that he'd sinned? You ever felt like that? I put my hands in the pie and I messed it all up. Now, God don't want anything to do with me. He saved me once, and look, nothing's changed. I'm still sinful. I still make mistakes. God must not be able to do anything with me. I've ruined it. He don't want me anymore. My life's over. So many people have that attitude. They think they've gone too far. But listen to me. Abraham had Ishmael. But guess what? God still gave him Isaac. You hear me tonight? God still gave him Isaac. You know what I think's fascinating about the Lord? Not only will He keep your promises, but He'll fix your mess, turn it into a message, and then still give you the promise that He gave you. Listen to me tonight. No, Brother Blake, you don't understand what I've done. Listen. John wrote, he said, while we were yet sinners, what? Christ died for us. Christ knew every sin you was going to commit, or I should say it like this. Christ knew every sin you could possibly commit in your life before you ever committed it. Whether you committed it or not, He knows the possibilities there. But yet He still died for you. He died for you knowing you were in sin. He died for you knowing you was going to make mistakes after you'd already been saved. He knew all this. And yet He still died for you. You know what that tells me? Just because we hit a little bump in the road doesn't mean that we just throw it all away. Christ died for that reason. That John said, I write unto this that ye sin not. But if you do, you have an advocate with the Father tonight. Listen to me. God's not done with you. Just because you've messed up, He'll take your mess, He'll turn it into a message, and He will still give you the promises. He's still going to give them to you tonight. Why? Listen, one of my favorite scriptures is right before Christ is going to be taken away. And He's praying for Peter. And He says, Peter, Satan wants to get you, but I'm going to pray for you. We ought to pay very close attention to that prayer. What was the prayer? That your faith will not fail thee. It's what Christ had for Peter. Notice, He didn't pray for Peter to be perfect. He didn't pray for Peter to go through life and never make a blunder, but that his faith would not fail him. And then when he was converted, that he would strengthen his brothers. What are you getting at, Brother Blake? Listen to me. Jesus knew Peter was going to travel far off, and He knew he was going to deny Him 3 times. But guess what? Peter may be imperfect, but you know, when you got good faith with God and you mess up, you know what? God's not called you to be perfect tonight. He's called you to be faithful. And when we mess up, all we have to come and do is come to the altar with a sincere heart and cry out in repentance, and the advocate with the Father will take care of it. And then after He takes care of your mess, guess what He's going to do? He's going to take that, and you can strengthen other people by telling them how you've come through. And God's given you deliverance. There's a doubt that it's not possible. There's a doubt that we've messed up too much for God to help us. And then here,